Hi, and welcome to Supplemental Security Income, SSI, for adults and children, the fourth installment of the 2022 Howard County Transition Symposium, a four-part webinar series presented monthly from February to May 2022. The Transition Symposium series is presented by the Howard County Transition Outreach Partnership, which includes Accessible Resources for Independence, Howard County Public Schools, the Autism Society of Howard County Recreation and Parks, the ARC of Howard County Department of Community Resources and Services, and NAMI Howard County. Each presentation will be recorded and posted along with any other materials on the Howard County Autism Society website, as well as emailed to all registrants. You only need to register one time, as many of you have. Okay, without further ado, let's get on to session 4. What are the benefits of these programs? How to apply? And are they appropriate for you and your young adult with a disability? Learn about Social Security Administration's Supplemental Security Income, Medicaid, and Social Security Disability Income, and their significance for transitioning youth as they enter adulthood and make a life for themselves. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Michael Dalto, who is a benefits consulting with High Notes Consulting, LLC. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Dawson and Sylvia. I really enjoy doing presentations, excuse me, for parents of transition-age youth, partly because I used to be a parent of 2 transition-aged youth myself. So I'm going to tell you my favorite transition-aged youth story. When my daughter was 14 years old, I attended a conference, and the keynote speaker happened to be also a father of a 14-year-old girl. And he told this story. He said that he began to feel as his daughter progressed through adolescence that he was really losing his relationship with her. So he reorganized his schedule so that he could drive his daughter to school every morning, just the 2 of them. And not surprisingly, when the first few days that he drove her to school, she didn't say a word, just had her nose in her phone the entire drive. But after a few days, kind of abruptly one morning, his daughter looked up at him and said, "Dad, you know how you do speeches sometimes in front of groups?" And he was thrilled and very surprised that she had actually initiated some conversation. And he tried to keep his cool, and he said, well yeah, I do know how I do those speeches sometimes. And his daughter said, well, when you do a speech, does anybody ever come up to you afterwards and tell you you did a good job? And he replied to her, well, that's not really the etiquette of these things. I mean, you know, people applaud and they ask questions and they show their appreciation other ways, but no, nobody really actually says, I did a good job. And his daughter said to him, well, then why don't you stop? And the next morning he was, actually next day, he did a speech in front of a group. He told that story. And after he finished his speech, a woman entered, came up to the front of the room, and she said to him, you did a very good job. And the next morning, he drove his daughter to school, and he told her the story. He said, you know, I did a speech yesterday, and a woman came up to me afterwards and told me I did a good job. And his daughter didn't skip a beat, didn't look up from her phone and said, yeah, well, old people lie to each other.
Sí, yo sé, pero eso lo tienen que hacer ellos. Yo no puedo controlar eso. Melissa?
Yeah, I'm sorry, folks. Something's
Yeah.
not working. So
Yeah.
I don't know that we're going to be able to do it. It's just too much material to get through. Can you make an announcement? What we'll do is we'll record it and perhaps maybe try to get a, highlights distributed to folks in Spanish. I'm very sorry. I don't know what's wrong. It's been working just fine. Yeah, my apologies.
Mis sinceras disculpas que no hemos podido organizar el cuarto de inglés y vamos a tener que continuar con el material y entonces más adelante vamos a presentárselos a ustedes con presentárselo con un intérprete.
Okay, Michael, we will try to provide some Spanish.
Can we try one more thing? Hold
sure.
on. Let's see, but no, because it's not.
Yeah, it's just not working. I don't know why.
Let's see.
I can hear you in both, so I think
Can
we
you
need to
still
move.
hear me?
I think we need to move on, Sylvia, because we got
Sure,
to leave.
sure.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm so sorry. So we'll get with you guys and Alicia and see about just doing a written translation or a summary or something. Okay. Okay, Michael, my apologies.
Quite all right, Melissa, thanks. Well, sorry you didn't get the full benefit of a good story, but in any event, we'll move on now. And we'll be talking today primarily about SSI benefits, supplemental security income, as that's the cash benefit that transition age youths, at least once they reach age 18, are most likely to be receiving. Talk about eligibility, how to apply, how to speed up the application process, medical benefit that comes along with it, et cetera, et cetera. And then we'll get into my favorite part, which is how does work affect the benefit? And how can you use safety nets called work incentives that help protect benefits while working? And then toward the end, we'll talk about a different cash benefit that people with disabilities can get from Social Security based on having a disability, which is Social Security disability insurance. And we'll cover just a little bit of information about that, because while most transition age youth who get benefits from Social Security are receiving SSI, some may later qualify for Social Security disability and may be switched from SSI to Social Security disability. So please feel free to type any questions you have into the chat as we go along. I will pause as questions arise. So who is eligible for SSI? This cash benefit from Social Security. A person who is any age and who meets Social Security's definition of disability. I'll explain what that is momentarily. A lot of people don't know that you can also get SSI even if you're not disabled, if you're older, if you're at least 65 years old. But naturally, we'll be focused on younger people with disabilities getting it. So have to be disabled if you're younger, have to be a US citizen or a so-called legal alien who meets certain requirements. And you have to have not much money. You have to have income and resources, also known as assets, below certain limits. So how disabled is disabled? What is Social Security's definition of disability? There's a different definition for adults who are 18 years old or older than there is for children who are under age 18. Starting with the adult definition, you have to have a severe disability that's lasted at least a year or is expected to last at least a year, or it could be a terminal illness. And for adults, the disability has to limit work. It's tied to the impact of the disability on the person's ability to work. So the disability has to prevent the person from doing substantial work that would usually be earnings of $1,350 a month or more in 2022, and that's gross wages. But frequently, earnings may be higher than that amount, and the person could still qualify for SSI when they first apply, thanks to certain subtractions from earnings that are allowed. Now, a blind person has some advantages in Social Security's disability programs, thanks to their lobby, which is the envy of disability groups throughout the country. They were able to carve out some special advantages and some better rules for people who meet Social Security's definition of blindness than anyone else gets. So to be considered blind by Social Security, the person's vision in their better eye with glasses has to be 20/200 or worse, or their field of vision has to be no wider than 20 degrees. And if a person meets that definition of blindness, they could be doing substantial work and still qualify for SSI when they first apply. So the definition for a child is very similar, but there's one key difference. So like an adult, a child has to have a severe disability that's lasted or is expected to last at least a year or be a terminal illness. But instead of the child's disability limiting their ability to work, preventing them from doing substantial work, the child's disability has to limit their ability to engage in age-appropriate activities. It has to cause, in Social Security's terms, marked and severe functional limitations. It's got to significantly limit certain activities that are typical for a child of the same age. So let's get into the financial limits. What is the income limit? And then we're going to talk about what the resource limit is. But first, let me distinguish between income and resources. Both are kinds of money, but I have a trainer friend who likes to say, income is what you get and resources are what you got. So if a person receives money during one calendar month, it counts as income during that month, and it's subject to the income limit. But if they have any of that money left over that they haven't spent or converted into a kind of asset that's not counted by the SSI program, if any of that money is left over as of the first day of the next calendar month, that leftover amount becomes a resource. And then that amount is subject to the resource limit. So for example, if someone receives $1,000 in income during the month of May, and they spend all but $200 of it, then they would be counted as having that $1,000 of income during May, the month they received it, and that would be applied to the income limit. And as of midnight on the 1st of June, the very next month, the $200 they had left over would become a resource, and that would be counted against the resource limit. and resources continue for as long as the person has them. So money is income in the month it's received, and any amount that carries over into the next calendar month becomes a resource. And then it's subject to the resource limit rather than the income limit. So what's the income limit? I wish I could make this a little simpler, folks. I wish I made the rules. I could explain all of this in 20 minutes, but unfortunately, I just explained them. So the income limit depends on the kind of income the person has. So Social Security, or the SSI program, divides income into two basic kinds. There's unearned income and earned income. So let's say a person has only unearned income, such as Social Security checks, like Social Security disability, or pensions, or dividends, or annuities, or interest income, or unemployment benefits, or lots of other kinds of government or some other kinds of income. Then the income usually has to be under $861 a month. And the amounts I'm giving, of course, are for the current year, 2022. These amounts will most likely go up in 2023. But suppose the person has only earned income, and earned income would be money that a person gets as compensation for work that they've done. So that would be wages from a job, self-employment income from a business, tips, salaries, royalties if a person sold a movie script, for example. These are all examples of earned income. And let's say that a person who's already been approved for SSI has only earned income. Aside from their SSI, their only income is from earnings, such as wages or self-employment. Their earnings, this is before taxes are taken out, usually have to be less than $1,767 a month this year in order for them to receive any SSI. Okay. Now it does say there after SSI payments have started. So just clarification, going back to a previous slide. Remember I said when a person first applies for SSI, they have to be considered, and this is an adult, 18 or older, they have to be considered severely disabled enough that it prevents them from doing substantial work, generally earning $1,350 a month or more in pre-tax earnings. But after the person's been approved for SSI, then what I'm saying on this slide is that their earnings could actually be somewhat higher and they could still receive some SSI. So most children under age 18 are not eligible for SSI, though many of them become eligible for SSI once they turn 18, once they reach adulthood. Why is that? It's because when a child is under age 18 and lives with one or two parents, a portion of their parents' money counts as if it belonged to the child. Social Security calls that process deeming. So that means a portion of a parent's income and resources are counted against the child's SSI eligibility. And as a result, because most parents have too much money for their kids to be eligible for SSI. Most children under age 18 do not qualify for SSI. But once they turn 18, then only their own money counts and not their parents' money, even if they continue living with their parents. And that's why many, many children under 18 don't become eligible for SSI until they reach age 18 and become adults. Okay. So we talked about the income limit. What is the resource limit, the limit on assets? Well, first off, what kinds of assets are counted as resources, are counted against the resource limit? Well, cash, bank accounts, stocks, bonds, CDs, money markets, the cash value of a whole life insurance policy, retirement accounts, other kinds of investments. Those are all examples of resources that do count for SSI. Also, real estate that a person owns other than the home they live in. All examples of resources that count. And for resources that are counted for SSI, the resource limit is only $2,000, which really stinks because, how is a person supposed to become more independent and less dependent on government benefits if they can't save more than $2,000? But luckily, there are some kinds of resources or assets that are not counted by the SSI program. First off, the home the person lives in. Even if a person getting SSI owns their own home, free and clear with no mortgage, as long as they live in that home, none of its value counts against the $2,000 resource limit. So you could live in $1 million home with no mortgage. As long as you live in it, you could still be eligible for SSI. The SSI program also doesn't count one motor vehicle. But if a person has 2 cars, then the value of one of them would count against that $2,000 limit. Now, life insurance that has no cash value without someone dying, like term life insurance, does not count. Certain burial funds don't count. Certain property that's used for a job or a business doesn't count. And then there are 2 that I want to spend just a little bit of time discussing, 2 kinds of resources that do not count against that $2,000 limit. One is called a special needs trust, and the other is an ABLE account. So I have a feeling that many of you have probably heard of at least one of these, if not both of them. But let me give a brief explanation. What is a special needs trust? It's a special account that holds money that's designated to benefit a person with a disability. But the money in that account is not counted as a resource. It does not count against the $2,000 resource limit for a couple of reasons. One is this trust account is set up in such a way that the person with a disability, although they're the only person who can benefit from the money, they don't technically own it. You do not own the trust. Trust is an independent legal entity, and it's not owned technically by any person. And secondly, the person with a disability, although they're the only one who can benefit from the money in the trust, is not allowed to have any control over that money. They have no say in how the money in the trust is spent. That job is left to a person who's appointed when the trust is created, who's called the trustee. The trustee is the person who is responsible for managing the money in the trust and making sure it's spent only to benefit the person with the disability. So the trustee controls the money, but they can't use the money to benefit themselves. They can only use it to pay for expenses for the person with the disability. Okay, and I'm going to hold off on the first question until I've talked about ABLE accounts, but it's a great question. So a special needs trust is particularly a helpful vehicle if someone in the family wants to leave money to a family member with a disability, maybe who gets SSI, without jeopardizing their benefits. You know, a grandparent could, in their will, specify that they want to leave money not directly to their granddaughter, grandson with a disability, but rather, excuse me, but rather have the money in their will left to a special needs trust for the grandchild. And then the money would only benefit the grandchild, but it would not be owned by them, not controlled by them, and would not affect their SSI eligibility. And there's no limit on how much money could go into that special needs trust for that purpose. Okay. Now, the other great kind of resource that's not counted against that limit is an ABLE account. ABLE accounts are the newest kind of resource that's not counted against the SSI resource limit. They came on board in other states starting in 2016. In Maryland, I think it was November of 2018, the ABLE accounts came online. And an ABLE account is a special account that is owned by a person with a disability. The person's disability had to start before they turned 26. Although the person with a disability could be any age when they open the ABLE account, they could be much older than 26. They had to have become disabled before age 26. And money can be saved in an ABLE account. Anybody can deposit money into it. The person with a disability, their family, friends, agencies, etc. And the first $100,000 that's saved in a person's ABLE account does not count against the $2,000 resource limit for SSI. And I think I've got a few slides regarding ABLE accounts coming up. But first, I did want to mention that if a child is under age 18 and they live with one or two parents, not only is a portion of the parent's income counted as belonging to the child, but a portion of the parent's resources is as well. Excuse me. So this is another reason that most children under age 18 don't qualify for SSI. because of the parents' money. Okay, so a bit more information about ABLE accounts. I've already covered some of this. Please forgive me. I am going to go get myself some water. Take a very, very short break here. Be right back.
Yo ya puse español, pero yo no escucho nada en español. No, solo en inglés.
Han sacado el español por el momento.
Yo sí yo la escucho, pero él ahorita no está hablando.
No va a haber traducción.
There, that's better. Forgive me. So there is a limit on how much money can be deposited into an ABLE account in a year.
Yo la escucho.
And that is no more than $16,000 a year. And that's from everybody who contributes to the ABLE account. That's one downside to an ABLE account compared to a special needs trust. There's no limit on how much money can go into a special needs trust at one time. But with an ABLE account, it's no more than $16,000 a year. So once money goes into an ABLE account, what can it be taken out to pay for? It's a variety of expenses, including education, housing, transportation, employment training and support, assistive technology, personal support, health prevention and wellness, financial management, legal fees, expenses for oversight and monitoring, even funeral and burial expenses. And the federal law that enabled states to create ABLE accounts also left the door open for the IRS to approve additional expenses in the future, because the IRS does have jurisdiction over ABLE accounts. Now, those of you familiar with ABLE accounts may have heard that there's a downside to them, which is that if the person with a disability who owns an ABLE account dies and there's still money left in their ABLE account, the state can claim it. But Maryland passed a law several years ago that said, no, Maryland is not going to do that. If a person with an ABLE account in Maryland, a Maryland resident with a Maryland ABLE account, passes away and they still have money left in their ABLE account, the state will not claim it unless required by another federal law, which would not ordinarily be the case, which is a big advantage of a person in Maryland opening their ABLE account in the state of Maryland. The state can't claim that money after the person passes away if there's any money left in their ABLE account. An ABLE account can be opened in any of dozens of other states by a Maryland resident, but then the money in their ABLE account left when they pass away could be claimed by the state. So they're wise to open their account in Maryland. Contributions by a Maryland resident to a Maryland ABLE account also have a Maryland income tax deduction. If a person contributes up to $2,500 a year in an ABLE account or more, then up to $2,500 of their contribution would be deductible on their Maryland income tax, which could save them potentially a few $100s a year. There's a choice of investment options, some very safe with very low interest, some with more moderate or aggressive risk, higher chance of getting a bigger rate of return, but also chance of losing money. And I recommend ABLE accounts as a great option for savings, particularly if the person receives SSI, because the first $100,000 in their ABLE account does not count against the $2,000 resource limit. So I'm going to pause now. I know we've got some questions. For a disabled person over 18 years of age, so eligible for SSI, since there is a resource limit, is there a seamless mechanism to route the monthly SSI directly into an ABLE account and then use the money as needed? This will prevent hitting the $2,000 limit. Well, excuse me, I strongly recommend that a person who receives SSI have their SSI payments directly deposited into an account other than an ABLE account. And then they can transfer money from this regular bank account into their ABLE account if they'd like to, and that can help prevent the balance in their regular bank account from reaching that $2,000 limit. I don't recommend having a person's SSI go directly into their ABLE account because it can take a little while for a person to withdraw money from an ABLE account. It does not provide instant access to money. Okay. And then slide says up to $16,000 a year into ABLE is not taxable. Is it only state tax or federal tax as well? That's a good question. Money in an ABLE account is not subject to either federal or state income tax. And that's an advantage of ABLE accounts over special needs trusts. Money in special needs trust is taxable. Can I elaborate on the tax-free issue for ABLE? Yes, I should specify that the money that goes into an ABLE account is after tax income. So if a person with a disability has an ABLE account, and let's say they want to put some of their wages into their ABLE account, their wages will still be taxed. But then they can put their after-tax money into their ABLE account. It's not a tax shelter in the sense that, for example, some retirement accounts, you can contribute pre-tax dollars into the account and actually save money on taxes. With an ABLE account, you don't get that kind of benefit, but there's no additional tax on the money when you deposit it into the ABLE account. And the withdrawals from an ABLE account are not taxable, so long as the annual limit is not exceeded. Next question, can either funds in an ABLE account or special needs trust be invested for growth, or is it just parked cash? Yes, they can be invested for growth. And particularly in the case of ABLE accounts, you've got a variety of generally 5 or 6 investment options, from very low risk to moderate risk to more aggressive. And you can mix and match, put a certain percentage in different types of investment options. It's something you decide on when you open the ABLE account. So you do have some flexibility there. Okay, I'm going to move on. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, is the maximum in an ABLE account of $100,000 over a lifetime, or just the amount maintained in the account at one time? The $100,000 is the balance in the ABLE account that does not count against the $2,000 limit for SSI, the $2,000 resource limit for SSI. So let's say that a person reaches that $100,000 threshold in their ABLE account, and then they go out and they spend $20,000 to buy a car. So now they have $80,000 left. Well, now they could save another $20,000 in their ABLE account to bring the balance back up to $100,000, and none of it would count against the $2,000 resource limit. So that $100,000 amount is the balance in the account. And that balance is not, does not count against the $2,000 resource limit for SSI, as long as it's not over 100,000. What if a person had more than 100,000? Let's say they had 101,000 in their ABLE account. The first 100,000 would not count. The last 1,000 in this example would. But if that was the person's only resource, that $1,000, that extra 1,000 in the ABLE account, then it would be below the $2,000 resource limit, and they'd still be eligible for SSI. Okay, so what's the most SSI that a person can get? In the state of Maryland, where only the federal money that is paid out for SSI is provided, a handful of states provide what's known as a state supplement, where the state will actually contribute extra state money to supplement the federal SSI payment. But in Maryland, where there's no state supplement, the maximum SSI that a person can get is $841 a month. And that's for an unmarried individual who's paying for their own food and shelter. So what if an adult who's 18 or older is not paying for food or shelter with their SSI? Then their SSI will be reduced. The main purpose of SSI is to make sure that a person has at least a basic minimum amount of income to pay for food and shelter. So if they're not using their SSI to pay for food and shelter, the logic of the program is they don't need as much, and then their SSI would be reduced. The maximum SSI that a person can get if they don't pay for their own food and shelter is only 2/3 of that $841 maximum benefit for people who are paying for food and shelter. So this year, the maximum for people not paying for food and shelter is only $560.67. So generally, an adult who's getting SSI has to pay for their own food and shelter to qualify for the maximum $841 a month. Now, if a child under age 18 is receiving SSI, which means that their parents' income and resources are low enough that the child can still get some SSI, the child doesn't have to pay for food and shelter generally, but the child's SSI may be reduced in rough proportion to the amount of income the parents have. Now, if a person has other income besides SSI, they're usually going to get less than the maximum SSI amount. Now, there's actually a certain logic to that. Think of it this way. The purpose of the SSI program is to make sure that an eligible person has at least a basic minimum amount of income to pay for food and shelter. So if a person has no other money except SSI, generally they'll get the full amount, $841 a month, because they need all of it to help them pay for food and shelter. What if the person has other income? Let's say they start out with $841 of SSI, but now they start getting other income from another source. As their other income goes up, logically, their SSI should go down because they wouldn't need as much SSI to meet their need for food and shelter. And the reverse is also true. If their other income goes down, then their SSI will usually go up because they need more of it to pay for food and shelter. So the relationship between SSI payments and other income is kind of like a balance or a scale or a seesaw. As one side goes up, the other side goes down, and vice versa. Okay, we're going to come back to that metaphor a little bit later. Now, this is a really popular topic, and I'm going to go through it a little slowly because usually there are questions about it. But what if an adult, 18 or older, is getting only the 2/3 of the maximum amount, $560.67 of SSI, rather than the maximum $841 a month? Is there a way that they can get their SSI increased to the maximum? And the answer is yes. They can pay for their fair share of food and shelter costs in their household. All right. Now, let's say that you have an adult son or daughter who's getting that reduced SSI amount, who lives with you, the parent or the parents. And you want to figure out, how do you charge them for food and shelter so they can get their SSI increased? There are two ways to do it. And I'm going to tell you the less desirable way first, and then the more desirable way. What's usually the less desirable way is to say, well, our son or our daughter is living with us, and we're living as a family economic unit. That, we share our income and our expenses in common. And, we live basically communally like a family. If you say that, then Social Security will look at the number of people in the family living in the home. Let's say it's 3 people, 2 parents and a son or daughter getting SSI. The person getting SSI has to be paying their fair share of the household expenses for food and shelter. Well, if it's a 3-person household, then their fair share would be 1/3. And if they pay that 1/3 of the total household expenses for food and shelter, then they can get the maximum SSI of $841 a month. But there are some downsides to that method. First off, you have to prove it to Social Security. You've got to provide evidence of your food and shelter costs, bills, canceled checks, etc. It's an administrative hassle. The other problem is there's a bit of a catch-22. Let's say that the monthly household expenses for food and shelter in your home are $3,000 a month for your household of 3. Okay. And let's say that you want to charge your son or your daughter their 1/3 of that amount so they can get the maximum SSI. Well, 1/3 of $3,000 a month is $1,000 a month. Even if your son or your daughter had their SSI increased to the maximum, 841 a month, Social Security will say, that's not enough to pay their fair share, their $1,000 a month. And in that case, they would continue to reduce it down to $560.67. No logic there, but that's the rule. So let's talk about the alternative. The alternative is to say, you know what? My son or my daughter still lives with me, but now they're an adult. And as an adult, they're responsible for their own expenses. They have to pay their own way. They are living in our home essentially as a boarder. We're charging them for room and board, for food and shelter. They are a separate economic unit. If you say that, then Social Security will ask, how much are you charging your son or your daughter? And how much would you charge an unrelated person who was a boarder in your home? And if you say that you're charging your son or daughter the same amount for room and board that you would an unrelated person, then they should be able to get an increase to the maximum $841 a month SSI. Okay, and there is a form. I provided you with a link on this slide to the Social Security form where you can document what you're charging your son or daughter for room and board. Let's see, what else do I want to tell you about this? Some Social Security workers are bigger sticklers for this issue than others. Some families I've known have told Social Security they were charging their son or daughter $300 or $400 a month for room and board, and that's what they would charge an unrelated boarder. And quite fairly, some of those Social Security workers have said, are you kidding? $300 or $400 for food and shelter in Howard County? I don't think so. That's not a market rate. Don't believe that's what you would charge an unrelated boarder. Provide some proof. And what I recommend that you do is go onto a site like Craigslist, look at rooms for rent, which usually include rent and utilities, and see what the least expensive ones you can find are. Take that rate, maybe record the ad so you've got some proof, add a reasonable amount on top of that for food, and say, here, this is my proof that I'm charging a fair amount for to my son for room and board. Okay. Heidi asks, would this require a lease? Could your disabled child enter into a contract given some of our kids would not have capacity to do so? I do recommend executing a lease. I can, afterwards, I can email to the organizers a sample lease that you could use to modify. And then on a related note, suppose you are applying for SSI initially for your son or your daughter. They have no money currently, and they're not going to have any money for another 6 months at least, most likely, until their SSI comes through. How can they pay for their share of food and shelter in the meantime? You can execute a loan agreement with them. You can say that you're providing them with food and shelter as a loan that they then must repay to you once their SSI is approved retroactively. And when they get their first SSI payment, which should cover multiple months retroactively, the first thing to do with that large lump sum is to pay yourself, you the parent, for the back rent and utilities and food that your son or daughter now owes you. Okay. So what if your adult son or daughter doesn't have the capacity to enter into a contract? It's rare in my experience that Social Security stands on ceremony that way. If your son or your daughter can sign their name and they sign to a lease and if necessary, not only a rental agreement, but a loan agreement. In my experience, Social Security will usually accept that rather than questioning your son's or daughter's ability to enter into a contract. Brian asks, what if the parent receives child support for their adult disabled child? How does that factor into the child paying for their own food or shelter? The child support is coming from a special needs trust. Okay, it's a good question. Now, child support is generally counted as income to the child, even though the parent may be receiving it directly rather than the child, on the theory, of course, that child support naturally is designed for covering expenses of the child. So if the child is under age 18, they're receiving SSI and they're getting child support, 2/3 of the child support amount they receive will be counted as so-called unearned income. And so their SSI will be reduced by almost 2/3 of the amount of the child support. If the person receiving child support is actually no longer a child, if they're an adult, 18 or older, the entire amount of the support is counted as unearned income, and it will reduce their SSI almost dollar for dollar. So is there another way to structure child support so that it won't affect a child's SSI? There is. One thing you can do is have the child support payments, rather than going directly to the custodial parent, have them paid directly into the ABLE account. Because money taken out of the money that goes into the ABLE account is not counted as income to the child. and money that's taken out of the ABLE account to pay for allowable expenses, including food and shelter, will not affect the SSI payment amount. Okay. Heidi asks, if you are your child's guardian, do your assets count toward your child's eligibility? Oh, great question. If you have established legal guardianship through a court for your adult child who's 18 or older, luckily, even though you're the legal guardian, your income and resources will not count against your child's SSI. You, the parent, only have some of your income and resources counted against your child's SSI if your child is under age 18. Once they're 18, parent's money doesn't count, even if the parent is the legal guardian. Okay. All right, so things are going to move more quickly now. We've slogged through some important but rather cumbersome details here, and we're going to move ahead a little more swiftly. So, is there a medical benefit that comes along with SSI? There is, and it's called Medicaid, which is also known as medical assistance. You see, rule number one for bureaucrats trying to confuse the public is give benefits more than one name. That confuses everyone. And generically, this medical benefit that comes along with SSI is known as Medicaid, but some states give it another name as well. And in Maryland, it's also known as medical assistance. So in the state of Maryland, Medicaid equals medical assistance. They're the same thing. Rule number two for bureaucrats trying to confuse the public is give very different benefits very similar names. Medicaid sounds a whole lot like Medicare, but they are very different benefits. And Medicare, I'll just kind of mention very briefly at the very end of the session. Okay, but if a person in Maryland gets any amount of SSI, we know the maximum is $841 a month. The minimum is $1 a month. If they get at least $1 of SSI or $841 a month of SSI or anything in between, they're automatically and immediately eligible for Medicaid, also known as medical assistance. Okay. Now, once your son or daughter gets SSI, that does not necessarily mean they will automatically receive their medical assistance card. What you're going to want to do is contact the local Department of Social Services and tell them that your child has begun to receive SSI, has gotten the approval letter, and ask them, what do you need to do to get their medical assistance card? And they should be able to tell you. So medical assistance is very helpful insurance for a person to have. It covers pretty much all medical expenses you would expect it would cover. It covers some services that other insurance rarely, if ever, covers. Certain psychiatric rehabilitation services in the community, services from the State Developmental Disabilities Administration. It even covers, through the local health department, transportation to and from medical services covered by medical assistance if you don't have alternative transportation. And it's very, very low cost. Generally, the only expense covered by medical assistance in the state of Maryland that has copays is prescriptions, and they're very small, only a bit over $1 for generic drugs and a bit over $3 for name brand drugs for each refill. Now, you do have to find healthcare providers who participate in medical assistance, who accept medical assistance as payment, which can be a challenge. In my experience, all hospitals and pharmacies accept medical assistance, but beyond that, it's more of a challenge. But medical assistance could be used to supplement other insurance. Let's say that you still have your son or your daughter covered on your private insurance through your employer. They can stay on your private insurance if you choose, and they can have medical assistance in addition to supplement that. And then in that case, they can go to any provider who accepts the private insurance, same as they already have been doing. Okay, I've already talked about this. So how do you apply for SSI? You can call Social Security's national toll-free number, 800-772-1213, and schedule an appointment to apply. Generally, this is done over the phone. You can now schedule in-office appointments as well. And if you want to be prepared for your application, you can actually look up the application forms that you'll be completing. And I provided you links to the 4 primary ones: the SSI application form itself. If your child is an adult, 18 or older, then there's a disability report for adults that documents their disabilities. If they're under age 18, then there's a disability report for a child that you'd be completing instead. And then there's an authorization to release information, generally information from medical providers, school, if your son or daughter is in special education, for example. And that way you can check out the forms in advance and be prepared to answer all the questions. Now, years ago, people were not allowed to apply for SSI online at all. But now many people can, using the link on slide 19. But there are some conditions. To be eligible to apply for SSI online, person has to be an adult, 18 to 65 years old, have to have never been married, not meet Social Security's definition of blindness, have to be a US citizen living in one of the 50 states or a couple of territories, must not have applied for or received SSI before, and have to be applying for Social Security disability insurance at the same time as they're applying for SSI. That last one is automatic. Anytime a person applies for SSI, Social Security automatically determines whether they would be eligible for Social Security disability insurance instead. So if your son or your daughter meets all those criteria, you can actually apply for SSI online.